In other news, we fly now to the United States. The FBI recently releasing its latest statistics on hate crimes across the country. And on the surface, the outlook is good. While anti-Semitic hate crimes still make up for the vast majority of religiously motivated incidents, the total number of hate crimes is slightly down from previous years. The problem, though, is that this report may not reflect the whole picture. The results, in part, may be due to the pandemic and a stark reduction in public Jewish street life. Additionally, according to the ADL, the FBI's numbers are severely underreported, and they only looked as far as 2020, so none of the attacks that spiked in response to the conflict with Hamas in May are included either. So, what are we to believe? Democratic New York State Assemblyman Charles Lavine is joining us with more. Thank you so much for joining us, Assemblyman. Now, what can you tell us about the recent spike in anti-Semitism and the efforts being made to curb this phenomenon, particularly as we've seen in New York?
Thank you for the invitation to be on ILTV. Unfortunately, over the course of the last years, those who hate, and New York alone, and the United States alone, do not have an exclusive population of people who hate. But those who hate, and especially those who hate Jews and other minorities, have felt that they have had the right, they have been enabled to express this hatred. We can think back to the demonstrations at Charlottesville 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago, when people were chanting, Jews will not replace us, by marching around with torches. We would never have thought to see this in the United States, but for many reasons, many of them political, those folks have thought that they have the ability now to be able to express their anger and their hatred and their prejudice. The best ways for us to approach those particular issues is simply to stand together as people of good faith. And real Americans are people of good faith. I question whether some of those folks who delight in expressing hatred and anger and expressing violence are real Americans. But this is not unique. We see this on a worldwide basis, and the best thing we can do is stand together and stand up. We are not innocent bystanders. We are upstanders, and we will not tolerate that sort of brutal hatred.
All right, so I'd like to press a little bit on this. You know, anti-Israel and so-called anti-Zionism has often been used as a smokescreen for anti-Semitic acts, and there have been a vocal number of voices, many from within the Democratic Party, that have been severely criticizing Israel and calling for diminishing ties. As a Jewish New York Assemblyman, have you felt any pressure in this regard?
I've felt absolutely no pressure from those elements. We have zany elements on both sides of the political spectrum. There is nothing new in this phenomenon. I view both of those sides of the spectrum, both of those edges of the spectrum, the same way. Yes, we'll listen to them. We have elements on the right, members of the Republican Party, who openly court Nazis and fascists and justify the acts of those who invaded our capital on January the 6th. Those people were not people who were friends to the Jewish people. And while at the same time, on the outer fringes of the left, there are those who are anti-Israel and at the same time anti-Semitic. We have to be cautious of all these folks. And we also have to be extremely cautious of political people who engage in demagoguery and those who enable others to hate and express their hatred.
All right, so now generally speaking, the state of New York and Israel have actually always held a fairly close relationship, particularly with New York. For example, just before the coronavirus erupted, the two states formed a special partnership to promote innovation, smart cities, and economic ties. What is the status of the partnership today, and have advancements been made in some of these areas recently?
Tremendous advances have been made. The state of New York and Israel are very strong trade partners. There's been well over $100 billion in trade between New York and Israel since the mid-1990s. And the last figures we have for this trade are 2020, and it was nearly $3 billion worth of trade. Good trade partners are good allies, and good allies are good trade partners. In addition to that, there are other foundational partnership elements that are at play here. The partnership between New York's Cornell University and the Technion on Roosevelt Island is at the forefront of scientific development and scientific research. This means billions of dollars of additional trade, and it also means that Israel and New York and Israel and the United States will continue to be at the cutting edge of scientific development. That is good for Israel, that is good for New York, it's good for the United States, and it's good for the entire.
Well, so if I can interrupt real quick, Governor Cuomo has resigned. He's been replaced by Kathy Hochul. What can we expect from the New York-Israel relationships going forward under her new tenure?
So let me express a bias here. And it's not a bias against Governor Cuomo, but it is a bias, a personal bias in favor, not against, in favor of Kathy Hochul, who I have known for many years and worked with very closely for many years. Governor Hochul is an extraordinary person. She is smart, she is tough, she is fully familiar with New York's government, and she is fully familiar with the government of the United States, having served an extraordinary and a term full of integrity in the United States House of Representatives. I look forward to continued great relations between New York State and the state of Israel under Governor under Governor Hochul's leadership. I'm used to saying Governor Cuomo for so many years that it is now Governor Hochul, and I'll have to get used to that, and I will get used to that. Let me add one additional factor that I think is truly important. Governor Hochul comes from modest circumstances growing up. She has a great feel for the middle class in the United States. And one last unashamed plug for Governor Hochul. Governor Hochul also has a tremendous amount of integrity and charisma. I look forward to a continued wonderful relationship between our state of New York and the state and nation of Israel.
All right. Assemblyman Lavine, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much again for joining us and speaking with us today.
Thank you for the invitation to be here. It's been a pleasure. Everybody stay safe.